Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and Giallo enthusiasts. This is Tanner Leeser, your host for The King in Giallo. This is a continuation of the Forgotten Giallo film series, episode 24, 1972, part 3. And I've got 3 gialli here I'd like to highlight. As always, thanks in no small part to Troy Howarth's book on Giallo cinema, So Deadly, So Perverse, 50 Years of Italian Giallo Films, Volume 1, 1963 to 1973. Like this video and subscribe to The King in Giallo. Click the notification bell icon so YouTube doesn't hide my new content from you. And if you enjoy what I do here, please consider subscribing to my Patreon. I have loads of exclusive content that can only be found there, plus early access to all of my videos. On to the video. The first Giallo film is Kill the Poker Player, also called Creeping Death, an Italian and Spanish co-production. The film is directed by Mario Bianchi, billed as Frank Bronston, who also co-wrote the film along with Paola Bianchi and Luis G. de Belen. Music is composed by Carlos Savina. The cast includes Robert Woods as Jonathan Pinkerton, Nieves Navarro, billed as Susan Scott, as Kate, Frank Bragna as Sheriff Luis Burton, Ivano Stacchioli as Clinton, and Carlo Gatti as Carl. The plot follows in the aftermath of a violent bank robbery, which leaves several dead and a fortune in stolen money unaccounted for. Since the loot was insured by Lloyd's of London, the company dispatches its man in the field, Jonathan Pinkerton, to investigate. Pinkerton arrives in a dusty border town filled with secrets, suspicious townsfolk, and a sheriff who may be his only ally. As he digs deeper into the mystery, Pinkerton uncovers layers of deception and a hidden criminal operation. But in a town built on bluffing, it's not the cards in hand, it's the ones up your sleeve. Kill the Poker Player is one of the rare Giallo spaghetti western hybrids that emerged in the early 1970s when the once mighty western was rapidly fading in popularity and Italian filmmakers were looking for ways to keep the audiences engaged. Like The Price of Death, 1971, before it, this film doesn't fully adopt the stylistic excesses of Giallo, but it flirts with its mechanics. Hidden identities, shifting alliances, and a final twist that pulls the rug out from under everything. And what makes it interesting is precisely that blend of tones. While many gialli of the time were diving into Baroque stylization and sadistic thrills, Kill the Poker Player operates on a quieter, more reserved level. The violence is restrained, the mystery is played straight, and the atmosphere feels more akin to a 1940s B-Western than anything Sergio Leone pioneered. But despite its old-fashioned pacing, it maintains a certain charm and moves along at a respectable pace. The film marked the directorial debut of Mario Bianchi, who had spent years working behind the scenes as an assistant director. He would return to this fusion genre with The Masked Thief, 1973, and also contributed to The Weapon, The Hour, and The Motive, 1972, a more traditional giallo that would become a minor cult favorite. Bianchi's later work would veer heavily into poliziesque, softcore, and eventually hardcore pornography. His most infamous film remains Satan's Baby Doll, 1982, a sleaze-heavy horror remake that solidified his reputation in the European exploitation circuit. He retired in 2001. Though Bianchi's direction here is functional more than inspired, he handles the procedural elements with competence and never allows the plot to stall. The action is basic, but brisk. What holds the film back from achieving cult status is its visual flatness. It lacks the operatic grandeur of Giallo and the stylistic flair of top-tier westerns. Still, it manages to thread a passable mystery with just enough intrigue to justify its place in hybrid territory. The film is anchored by Robert Woods, playing the charming but perceptive Pinkerton. Woods, born in Colorado in 1936, had carved out a successful career in European cinema by this point, having appeared in spaghetti westerns like $5,000 on One Acre, 1965, and Seven Guns for the McGregors, 1966. Though his voice is dubbed in the English version, Woods brings an understated charisma to the screen, and his presence helps elevate what could have been a forgettable lead. Woods would go on to work with Jess Franco on films like The Other Side of the Mirror, 1973, and Countess Perverse, 1974, eventually stepping away from the spotlight in the late 70s. Backing him is Nieves Navarro, credited here as Susan Scott as per usual, a familiar face to fans of giallo and Italian genre cinema. As a sultry saloon owner, Navarro brings the same smoldering intensity she displayed in films like Death Walks at Midnight, 1972, and The Case of the Scorpion's Tail, 1971. Her role here is limited, but she commands the screen every time she appears. Perhaps the most surprising standout is Frank Bragna, cast as the town sheriff. For once, Bragna, typically relegated to supporting or background roles in spaghetti westerns, gets a substantial part, and he clearly enjoys the opportunity. Born in Spain in 1932, Bragna was a familiar face in the genre, appearing in several Leone films. A Fistful of Dollars, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West, often uncredited. He received more screen time in films like Sugar Cult, 1967, and The Price of Power, 1969, and would later go on to cult horror notoriety in Juan Piquer Simon's Pieces, 1982. He passed away in 2012. The music by Carlos Savina is serviceable, light on memorable themes, but effective in establishing mood. Savina, who worked on everything from Fellini films, was a prolific composer and often brought more to a film than the budget allowed. Here, his score doesn't leave much of an impression, but gives the film a certain polish nonetheless. Kill the Poker Player isn't essential viewing, but it's a fascinating artifact from a transitional moment in Italian genre cinema, straddling two declining forms, spaghetti westerns and early giallo. It offers a restrained, grounded mystery rather than a stylistic bloodbath. What it lacks in spectacle, it makes up for in curiosity value, and for completionists of either genre, it's worth a look. The second giallo film is Devil in the Brain, an Italian and French co-production. The film is directed by Sergio Sollima, who co-wrote the film along with Suso Cecchi D'Amico. The music is composed by the maestro Ennio Morricone. The cast comprises Keir Dullea as Oscar Mino, Stefania Sandrelli as Sandro Garces, Micheline Presley as Countess Claudia Alcio de Blanc, Dino Boazzelli as Dr. Emilio Bontempi, Renato Sestier as Ricky Garces, Maurice Ronet as Fabrizio Garces, and Orchidia de Santis as Caterina. The plot focuses on Oscar, a wealthy expatriate recently returned from Argentina who arrives in Italy only to find that his former lover, Sandra, is a shell of her former self. Her once sharp mind has seemingly unraveled following the mysterious death of her husband, Fabrizio. Now childlike and emotionally detached, Sandra lives under the watchful eye of her domineering mother, Countess Claudia. With the aid of the skeptical but compassionate Dr. Bontempi, Oscar begins to suspect that Sandra's condition is more than trauma. It may be repression. And as the layers of aristocratic secrecy peel back, Oscar finds himself spiraling into a tragedy far deeper than he anticipated. Devil in the Brain is a striking outlier with the giallo landscape. Released in 1972 during the height of the genre's obsession with black-gloved killers and stylized carnage, this film offers something far more subdued and insidious, a psychological mystery grounded in character, emotional disintegration, and familial rot. The violence is restrained, the sexuality is implied, and the horror here is internal, quietly festering beneath privilege and repression. Director Sergio Sollima, best known for politically charged spaghetti westerns like The Big Gun Down 1966 and Face to Face 1967, approaches the material with intellectual precision and unexpected tenderness. Working from a script co-written with Suso Cecchi D'Amico, the legendary screenwriter behind Bicycle Thieves, Rocco and His Brothers, and The Leopard, Sollima constructs the film like a psychological puzzle, one built not for cheap thrills, but for slow, unsettling revelations. The result is less a whodunit than a study of how memory, guilt, and class expectations can quietly devastate the human psyche. Despite its giallo-adjacent classification, the film resists most of the genre's hallmarks. There are no elaborate murder set pieces, no baroque lighting schemes, no fetishized violence, Instead, Devil in the Brain leans on elliptical editing, fragmented chronology, and emotional ambiguity. It's a film about the aftermath of a death, not the act itself, making it closer in tone to Don't Look Now or Footprints on the Moon than anything in the Argento canon. Keir Dullea, fresh off his iconic performance as Dave Bowman in 2001: A Space Odyssey, 1968, brings his signature restraint and haunted detachment to the role of Oscar. At first distant, Dullea's performance slowly deepens as his character's obsession with curing Sandra reveals itself to be just as broken as the situation he's trying to fix. Stefania Sandrelli, one of Italy's most celebrated actresses, is devastating as Sandra. Best known at the time for roles in films by Pietro Germi and Bernardo Bertolucci, Sandrelli had recently crossed into genre territory with The Black Belly of the Tarantula, 1971. Here, she plays a woman shattered by a trauma so profound it has pushed her into psychological retreat. The performance is fearless, alternating between eerie regression and flashes of lucidity that suggest a terrible truth just beyond reach. Child actor Renato Sestier, soon to become a star of Italian melodramas in the mid-70s, appears here in a surprisingly layered role as Sandra's son, Ricky. What initially reads as bratty or antagonistic is slowly revealed to be emotional self-preservation. He had recently appeared in Mario Bava's A Bay of Blood, 1971, and would soon be seen, uncredited, in Sergio Martino's Torso, 1973. Dino Boazzelli, best known in Italy for playing Nero Wolfe on television, brings warmth and intelligence to Dr. Bontempi. Rather than the usual bumbling or dogmatic doctor figure, Bontempi is portrayed as deeply human, caught between medical duty and personal compassion. His presence anchors the film's thematic core. Like much of Sollimi's work, Devil in the Brain includes subtle critiques of the aristocracy. There's no polemic here, but class tension simmers under the surface. The Countess hides behind appearances, more concerned with social propriety than psychological healing. A character openly resents the privileges of the elite, but the film's true indictment is quieter. It suggests that wealth isolates its possessor and paralyzes them in the face of scandal. In this world, secrets are maintained not out of malice, but because shame is more terrifying than justice. Visually, the film is elegant without being showy. Cinematographer Aldo Scavarda, who worked with Antonioni and Bertolucci, captures sun-drenched villas and sterile interiors in a way that heightens the emotional alienation. Ennio Morricone's score is subtle, melancholic, and perfectly attuned to the film's psychological tempo. Morricone rarely composed for gialli in this key, and his restraint here is as much a highlight as his bolder genre efforts elsewhere. Devil in the Brain isn't about solving a murder. It's about watching the emotional fallout of one. It's a patient, sorrowful film that unfolds like a suppressed memory. It may lack the lurid thrills that define giallo in the popular imagination, but what it offers instead is something richer, a slow, elegant spiral into grief, repression, and the cost of silence. The third and final giallo film for this video is Who Killed the Prosecutor and Why?, an Italian production. The film is directed by Giuseppe Vari, billed as Joseph Warren. The screenplay was written by Thomas Lang, and the music is composed by Mario Berolazzi. The cast includes Lou Castel as Carlo, Beba Loncar as Olga, Adolfo Celli as Inspector Vezzi, Massimo Serrato as Uncle Fifi, Umberto Dorsi as Romano, Renato Baldini as Marshal Notar Antonio, and Antonio La Reina as Mauri. The plot follows Carlo, a sleazy young photographer who is snapping glamour shots of his girlfriend Olga on a desolate stretch of beach when fate delivers a twisted opportunity. A car pulls up. Two men emerge. A well-known prosecutor is gunned down, his car set ablaze. Carlo, ever the opportunist, grabs his camera and documents the entire thing. What starts as a random stroke of luck becomes a fast, unraveling nightmare when he tries to sell the photos to a scandal rag, encouraged by his shady acquaintance Uncle Fifi, who just happens to run a pornography ring. As word spreads, Carlo finds himself hunted by the very people responsible for the killing, with the law closing in just as quickly. Who Killed the Prosecutor and Why is one of the more obscure entries in the Giallo adjacent canon, leaning far closer to crime procedural than to bloody operatic thrillers that define the genre's peak. It's a quiet, workmanlike film that delivers just enough intrigue and paranoia in its final act to qualify for inclusion. But viewers expecting elaborate set pieces, surrealism, or splashy violence should temper their expectations. The director, Giuseppe Vari, worked under the anglicized pseudonym Joseph Warren and was by this point a genre veteran, albeit one better known for sword and sandal films and spaghetti westerns, like The Hole in the Forehead, 1968, and The Last Killer, 1967. A former editor turned director, Vari never became a major voice in Italian genre cinema, instead moving fluidly between formats. Historicals, crime thrillers, and eventually television, without leaving a defining signature. Who Killed the Prosecutor and Why remains his only foray into the Giallo territory. He directed his final film in 1987 and died in 1993. Stylistically, the film plays things safe. It lacks the visual bravado of the genre's heavy hitters and rarely indulges in anything approaching excess. Even the murders are cleanly executed with little gore or cinematic flair. The mood is more in line with 1970s Italian political thrillers than with the lurid energy of The Bird with the Crystal Plumage or What Have You Done to Solange, let's say. There are some expected touches, a shadowy pornography subplot, crooked power structures, and an ambiguous protagonist, but they're handled with restraint. If the plot feels familiar, the film's strength lies in its secondary characters. Massimo Serrato nearly walks off with the entire movie as Uncle Fifi, a wheelchair-bound pornographer whose mixture of class and corruption gives the film its only real spark. Serrato, who began his career in the late 1930s and shared a child with legendary actress Anna Magnani, had already built an impressive resume by this point, appearing in everything from El Cid, 1961, to Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now, 1973. Within the Giallo world, he'd go on to appear in Autopsy, 1973, The Blood-Stained Shadow, 1978, and Killer Nun, 1979. Here, he exudes a faded grandeur and a quiet menace, elevating every scene he's in. Adolfo Celli is also on hand as Inspector Vezzi, delivering a characteristically dry performance. Known internationally as Largo from Thunderball, 1965, Celli was a frequent presence in both Giallo and Polizieschi, always bringing a touch of upper-class cynicism to his roles. His detective here is more interested in stamp collecting than cracking the case, but his bemused detachment adds a welcome layer of sardonic charm to otherwise flat procedural scenes. Lou Castel plays Carlo, the so-called lead, though his performance is one of the film's weaker links. Castel made a name for himself as the volatile anti-hero of Alberto Latuada's Fists in the Pocket, 1965, and later appeared in a string of genre titles including Orgasmo, 1968, and A Bullet for the General, 1966. But here, his performance is strangely muted, neither sympathetic nor compellingly sinister. The script wants us to believe Carlo is undergoing some sort of moral awakening, but Castel never quite sells it. He remains more cipher than character. On the other hand, Beba Lunkar brings a welcome touch of empathy as Olga, Carlo's girlfriend. Her role as an aspiring model tired of exploitative photo shoots adds some texture to the film's commentary on voyeurism and objectification, though the film never pushes far enough to make these themes fully land. Lunkar had previously appeared in the stylish island thriller Interrobang, 1969, and this would be her final entry in the Giallo realm. While the film flirts with sleaze, complete with strip club scenes and pornographic subplots, it never fully commits. The violence is bloodless, the nudity mild, and even the supposed moments of tension are delivered with a kind of quiet shrug. For some, this will feel like missed opportunity. For others, it's a refreshing shift toward grounded storytelling. Either way, the film's ambitions are modest, and for the most part, it achieves them. Who Killed the Prosecutor and Why is a by-the-numbers thriller that only briefly dips its toe into Giallo waters. Its subdued approach, focus on dialogue over set pieces, and old-school structure may leave some viewers cold, but it has its merits. A strong supporting cast, a few late-game twists, and a tone more in line with political noir than pulp horror give it a quiet, workmanlike appeal. It won't make anyone's top 10, but for completionists, it's a curio worth checking off the list. And those are the Forgotten Gialli for this episode. I hope you learned about something new here, and if you are interested in watching these movies, you can look them up online. If you do watch them or have already seen them, I invite you to leave your thoughts on them in the comments. Follow The King in Giallo on Instagram and give a like to The King in Giallo on Facebook. Subscribe here on YouTube if you aren't already, and join me every week for new Giallo film content. Join The King in Giallo on Patreon for exclusive content and early access to all of my videos. Thank you all very much for your continued support, and thank you especially to my patrons who support my work directly. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
Che bellezza, se ne va. Ma Ricky, sono contento quando lui non c'è.